like to start out by asking the question, what is health? Is health the absence of disease, do you think? That, for the most part, is what many people have thought for years and years, that health was simply the absence of disease. But could you actually be sick and not have any symptoms of it? Yes, you could. So actually, it's a very poor definition. The definition I like has more to do with something that's more active, that's more dynamic, that's more progressive, and that is health or wellness is something that is a continual thing where a person is constantly striving to meet their fullest potential. It's something that doesn't stop. It goes on and on and on. It's progressive. And it's something that we need to be a very active participant in. As soon as you stop, you start going backwards. You know, just like a garden. If you don't continually work on that garden, you know, to keep the weeds and all that pulled, in a very short matter of time you have what they call entropy. I believe that's the second law of thermodynamics. And that law states that rather than things moving to be better and better and better, you know, things are constantly moving backwards from a state of organization and complexity to disorganization and chaos. Just leave your garden alone for a few weeks and you'll understand what that's all about. Well, our health is much that way. It's something that we have to be continually striving at, and as we do, as we become an active participant, God then adds His blessings, and we have what's called wellness. Now, there's a new word for you, wellness. It's used quite a bit these days. It's so new that every time I write it on my computer, my spell checker wants me to correct it. But it's actually used so often now, I think it has become a word. I'd like to share with you a little bit about my personal philosophy of health, and I've gleaned my personal philosophy from the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy. And I found something, years ago that's really been an anchor to me. And I believe that others have benefited from it too. Because you see, I do not believe that our God is the type of God that if we actually become ill, that He wants us to go on this long hunt for this needle in a haystack. You know, if you go down to Brazil someplace and you get a little bit of bark off this certain tree, and then you go over to the pyramids and you get a little bit of this particular type of sand, and you get some clay from another place, and if you can mix that up in just the right proportions, well, you've got a cure for cancer, or you've got a cure for some other dreaded disease. I really do not believe that it's that hard or that difficult. I think if we get on that kind of thinking, that we're on the wrong track. Well, in this little book that was sort of the handbook for medical missionaries, Ministry of Healing, in the chapter called A True Knowledge of God, I found something that's been just a real blessing to me. And I'm not going to read all of it to you, but just a few excerpts, and then maybe you could read it sometimes this week in your private devotions. It starts out by talking about creation. This is beginning on page 414. It says, the work of creation cannot be explained by science. What science can explain the mystery of life? It's an unexplainable science. We can work at it, and we can try to understand, but we'll never fully, completely understand it. And besides that, spiritual things are spiritually discerned. You know, a study of anatomy and physiology is the very basis of a study of medicine. But if you're not spiritually discerning, you can study anatomy and physiology and come up with some real erroneous ideas. But as somebody that is spiritual starts studying anatomy and physiology, guess what they see? They see the Creator. They see the great designer. They are continually awed. You know, the deeper they go, you know, with the microscope, the more they're awed by what they see. And they continually praise God for the way that He arranged things. It goes on to say that in creation of the earth, God was not indebted to pre-existing matter. He simply spake and it was. He simply commanded and it stood fast. And it goes on to talk about all the things He created, how He created man, how everything was placed under law. And you know, sometimes we get the idea that God sort of created everything and then He put some kind of inherent power within the things that He created, and then those things just sort of, kind of like a clock that's been wound up, they just sort of run along, you know, and just keep going for, you know, however length of time that before the clock runs down. But, you know, the Spirit of Prophecy and Bible, they contradict that understanding, that there is no inherent power in anything. For example, on page 416 it says, "It is not by inherent power that year by year the earth yields its bounties and continues its march around the sun." And it goes on to talk about how that God is actively involved every day. When the sun came up this morning, God was there. And when the sun goes down tonight, God is there. He's continually making this thing work and function. Well, it goes on to even talk about vegetation. It says, "It is by His power that vegetation is caused to flourish, that every leaf appears, every flower blooms, every fruit develops." No inherent power there. It's God actively involved, making it work. Now, this next sentence was the sentence that really brought my understanding to me, I guess, that I really had to think about and concentrate on. It simply says, speaking of the laws of nature, it says the laws of nature, are not self-acting. You just got to think about that just for a moment now. The very laws of nature, there's nothing inherent in them as far as power is concerned. They're not self-acting, not in any way, shape, or form. In order for the very laws of nature to work, God has to make them work. They don't act of themselves. Now I'm going to just elaborate on that just a little bit. It goes on to talk about the mechanism of the human body, and it says that the mechanism of the human body cannot be fully understood. It presents mysteries that baffle the most intelligent. Now, even if you think that you are the most intelligent, it still has mysteries that will even baffle you. But as for myself, I'm far from being anywhere close to the most intelligent. Sometimes I wonder if I'm even intelligent. It goes on to say that it is not as a result of a mechanism which once set in motion continues its work, that pulse beats and breath follows breath. So again, there's no inherent power in the human body. It says that in God we live and move and have our being. The beating heart, the throbbing pulse, every nerve and muscle in the living organism is kept in order and activity by the power of an ever-present God. Now, just think about this for a moment. This will be a little mind-staggering here. You know, we can't see it, but basically life is chemistry. It's just zillions of chemical reactions taking place all the time. You know, electrons being swapped back and forth between atoms and molecules. And God is actively present during all that operation. As a matter of fact, God is making it happen. You know, there's those that got into pantheism. They thought that, you know, God was nature, you know, that He was in every leaf and every tree and all those things. But no, that's not the case. But God makes nature work, and He makes our human body work. Every time our pulse beats, every time we take a breath, every time an electron, you know, makes a transaction, you know, with another molecule, God was there making that happen. And you think about how much that's going on in your body, and you think of all the people in the whole wide world and the whole wide universe, and you know, that begins to stagger your imagination after a while. God is a very active God. And my picture of God as I study physiology and these types of things gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Where the evolutionists, as they study these things, their picture of God gets littler and littler and littler and littler until they confine everything into a itsy-bitsy, teeny-weeny little box that God can't even fit in. But for the Christian, there's no box. And then ending with this particular statement that's one of my favorites, where it says, above the distractions of the earth, God sits enthroned. All things are open to his divine survey, and from his great and calm eternity, he orders that which his providence sees best. That's the God that we serve. Now that's been helpful to me simply because we've tried to help a lot of people in regards to their health. And so many people got this idea, got this concept that they really have to go out and they have to look for these different combinations of whatever it might be and put them together, and you know, if I can just find the right one and just find the right combination, just find the right health institute, just find the right person somewhere out there, you know, then, you know, I'll be healed. But that's not God's program. That's not what he's all about. It's not that difficult. It's not that hard. That's not what he's trying to get across to our minds. You know, we had the privilege, and I don't think Bob would mind me sharing this with you. We had the privilege of having Bob Bresnahan at our house for 3 weeks. And, you know, we were having a treatment one night, and he was sitting there in the bathtub. And he was expressing a real heartfelt desire, He was saying, you know, if the Savior would walk by right now, he says, I would not wish to detain him at all, you know, because I know he's busy and I know he has a lot to do. So I would not want to detain him. I would not want to stop him in any way. But if he walked by, I would just like to reach out and touch the hem of his garment. And I got to thinking about that, and you know, something just came to my mind at that time, and I got real excited. And I said, hey, Bob. He says, what? I says, you know what I think? And he says, what? I said, I think you're sitting on it. And he says, sitting on what? I said, I think you're sitting on the hem of his garment. And he says, what do you mean? I says, this water. I mean, you're sitting in this water. And I says, I think this is the hem of his garment. I mean, I think you're not only touching it, I think you're sitting on it. And he said, well, I never thought of it that way. I says, no, I'm really serious. I said, I really think that that's what the simple remedies are all about. I think that's what they are. And I says, I think it's an act of faith. And I says, and God honors that faith by our being a participant in these things. Well, I put that in my CD-ROM hoping that I might find some correlation there. I didn't find it exactly like that, but I did find this statement. This is from Signs of the Times, 10/25/1899. It says, by faith she put forth her hand, and touching the hem of his garment, was instantly made whole. Her faith was not in the garment. You know, our faith is not in the water. You know, our faith is not in the food. Our faith is not in a thing. Her faith was not in the garment, but in the virtue which the garment covered. That's where the faith was, you see. And that's where our faith needs to be. And when we get so carried away, you know, with apparatuses and this and that and the other thing, our faith, you know, starts to focus on the apparatus or the thing or the concoction or whatever it might be, rather than on God, who has just told us that the very laws of nature do not act of themselves, you see. So anything that works only works because God makes it work. That's it. And I have to keep telling myself that all the time and constantly. You know, I'm talking to individuals, the focus, it goes to the apparatus. It goes to the thing. It goes to the charcoal. It goes to the blankets. It goes to the hot packs. It goes, you know, constantly jumping to things, you see, rather than reaching out past those things and seeing a Savior who actually needs to add virtue to those things to make them work. Another statement I found on that light is Desire of Ages 8:24. It says, in the Savior's manner of healing, there were lessons for his disciples. On one occasion, he anointed the eyes of a blind man with clay and bade him go wash in the pool of Siloam. He went his way, therefore, and washed and came seeing. The cure could be wrought only by the power of the great healer. Yet Christ made use of the simple agencies of nature. While he did not give countenance to drug medication, he sanctioned the use of simple and natural remedies. Not because natural remedies have some kind of inherent power, you know, lurking inside them. Not because of that. But because, you know, he's made them harmless. You know, he's made them function under certain laws, and those are laws where they do not harm our physiology. And he says, you do this, and I'll add my virtue, and I'll bless you. And that's really what it's all about. It has to do with faith. And one more. I'll read you this whole quotation. There's part of it I wanted to point to, but I thought it was a very interesting quotation. This is found in Manuscript Releases, Volume 16, page 289, where she says that the medical fraternity, represented to me as Freemasonry, with their long, unintelligible names, which common people cannot understand, would call the Lord's prescription for Hezekiah quackery. And, you know, I get a little bit of that every now and then. I don't know how that happens to you, but, you know, when you start talking about simple remedies and things, people, you know, because they can pronounce it and because they know what it is, tend not to have too much faith in it. You know, things that are more mysterious with names you can't pronounce, you know, tend to make you feel like they might have a better chance of working, I guess. He goes on to say that death was pronounced upon the king, but he prayed for life, and his prayer was heard. Those who had the care of him were told to get a bunch of figs and put them on the sore, and the king was restored. Now, can you imagine that? And these people were actually caring for the king, and they had all their remedies, you know, and all their mysterious concoctions, and the Lord kind of interrupted that, you know, and said, no, go get some bunch of figs and make a poultice here. He goes on to say that this means was taken by God to teach them that all their preparations were only depriving the king of the power to rally and overcome the disease. While they pursued their course of treatment, his life could not be saved. The Lord diverted their minds from their wonderful mysteries to a simple remedy of nature. Because sometimes the things we do and the concoctions and whatever it might be killing us, you see. And the Lord doesn't want us dead, and so he sort of directs our minds to simple things that will not harm our physiology. And he says, I'll bless these. You know, you leave these things alone, they're gonna hurt you. But again, we tend to feel that you know, the more mysterious it is, the better chance it might have of working, which is not true. It's not the case. Well, this understanding has, like I say, has been a blessing to me, because from time to time we do have people come to our home who oftentimes are very sick, and they want to fasten their hold onto something. And much of the time they've gone many other places, and they've taken other cures, and they're not getting better. And it seems like the very last thing that people do after all other means have been exhausted, they say, okay, I guess I better try the simple remedies. You see, I guess I better go see what the Lord has for me here, and see if maybe something along that line might be of benefit. Now, it's a shame it works that way, but for some reason, it seems to. But I believe that, that we shouldn't go through all that menagerie. I can remember a lady that came to us. She was a little Catholic lady. And she had cancer of the liver, and her liver, when she came that day, was so swollen it was like a football. And she had it cradled under one arm like that. And she came into our home and she was, you know, all bent over and, you know, really in a lot of pain. And of course she'd given up all hope of ever, you know, becoming well. And so I set her down right off and I shared some of these things with her. And I said, now listen, I said, I tell you what's going to happen. I said, this is what the devil does. Is he's going to have a person over here tell you about a cure for cancer. A person over here is going to tell you about a cure for cancer, and one over here, and one over here, and one over here, and you're going to get, you know, 25, 30, 50, you know, or more different cures for cancer. And you're going to have the feeling that if I don't try them all, I may miss the very one that will cure me. You know, I've got 50 to choose from, 50 doors to go through, and if I choose the wrong one, you know, I may not get healed. So I've got to do all of them if I can, if I live long enough. And I says, now what that's going to do is probably in the process of trying to find the right door, you're going to die because all that's going to take time, and you see, you really need to do something right now. And I said, now what I'm going to tell you is actually the only thing in the world that's really going to work. Now that sounds kind of arrogant, doesn't it? Now I can say that because, you know, it's in God's Word, you see. It's God's way, it's not my way. You know, it's God's way. So I can be really, really confident that, that way, if it be God's will work over above any other way. And so I shared this with this lady. She says, okay. She says, I understand what you're saying. And she says, I don't have much time. I realize that, so we're going to do it your way. I said, well, it's not my way. It's God's way. And so we started the work. You know, within about 4 days, the swelling had gone down to where it was imperceptible. You could not see it. And she was standing upright, and she could breathe and breathe deeply, and she couldn't walk or anything when she came. And after about 4 days, she was walking several miles with us and was feeling quite good. Now, it's an unfortunate thing that happened with that lady is she went home, and sure enough, some of her friends talked to her, and one says, oh, there's this wonderful new thing called macrobiotics, and I mean, this is the way to go, and you know, and another one pulled her this way, and so now you got to come down here and do this, and exactly what I told her was exactly what happened, and she died finally in the hospital during a chemotherapy regime. So, you know, after you've seen this happen time and time and time again, you just know there's really only one way to do this, and that's God's way. Okay, I thought we would begin then by looking at this philosophy of health, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this portion over here because all of you know that portion over there, the 8 natural remedies. Hopefully, we're all practicing that to the best of our ability, and doing it in a balanced way. You know, one thing about God's people, it seems that there are always those that want to get into the coldness of indifference, or there's those that want to get into the fires of fanaticism, and God really wants us to stay sort of on a balanced path, doesn't He? He doesn't want us to get, you know, extreme in any direction. And so on any number of these things, you know, we've got sort of a wide way, and we need to kind of stay in the middle of the road here. So we're not going to talk too much about them, but nutrition is certainly important, isn't it? Because it's very true that we are what we eat, and the things that we eat, they all break down chemically. They all break down, and then our body uses all those little small molecules to build up other things and to you know, restore our body to health. The more we know about this, the better off we are, and nutrition really is all about chemistry, because that's where things really happen, is on a chemical on a chemical level. I say the more you know about that kind of thing, the better off you are, simply because, people tend to think that, well, boy, this sounds good, so I think I'll take this, because when I take this, it's going to somehow do the job for me. You hear people talking about, well, I have very poor digestion, so I think I ought to take these certain enzymes, not realizing that the body doesn't use enzymes that way. You see, the body makes its own enzymes, and everything that it takes in here, the body totally breaks down, totally dismantles it, and it uses it, but may not use it in the way that you thought it might. Another person might say, well, lecithin is good. I know it's good because the membranes of my cells are made out of phospholipid material, you see. And I know lecithin is kind of a phospholipid material, so I'm going to take that, and then my body will take that lecithin just as it comes in. It's going to take that and help build up my the cells of my body. Well, actually, that's not how it works. When you understand physiology, you see that the body is going to take that stuff and it's going to break it completely down to its smallest common denominator, and then it's going to use that material just like it uses any other material of that nature. But it won't use it like it came in, you see. And so the more you study nutrition, the more you realize that what you really need to do is eat an abundance of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. You need to eat a variety of them over days and weeks, you see. That's kind of simple, isn't it? I mean, it's very simple. And when you look at your plate, like at dinner time, there should be some green leafy things on there, and there should be some yellow or orange type things on there. And protein should be, really small. The protein's small, the other thing's really big. And there should be some grain on there of some type, whether in a casserole or whatever it might be. And when you look at your plate, it should be kind of colorful in that way, and you realize then that, hey, I'm getting some good food here. And so, not at one meal, but over days and over weeks, you need to have a variety of different types of fruits and different types of vegetables and different types of grains. And if you do that, you'll have good health. You don't have to really stand on your head, go through a lot of contortions. You don't have to eat it out of a jar or a box or some kind of a container. You can just take it the way the Lord has packaged it, and you really will do fine, even though it seems very simplistic in its nature. Now the other thing, this is really, it's not too hard to get people to eat. People do that pretty easily. What is hard to get people to do, though, is exercise. It's even hard to get me to exercise. And the reason is not because we don't like to exercise, or it's not because we don't want to exercise. It's because we're what? Oh, boy, there you go. We're too busy to exercise. But we know in order to have good health, we know we have to exercise. So when we say we're too busy to exercise, what we're really saying is we're too busy to have health. Isn't that what we're really saying? It's sort of what we're saying. We may not, plug that all in that particular way, but that's sort of what we're saying. And so we need to get ourselves on a good exercise program, and that exercise can be of a variety of things. If you want to do just exercise for the sake of exercise, walking is probably about the best one you could choose. It just works real well with your physiology. It doesn't rip up your knee joints or bounce things out of place or anything like that, like maybe running or jogging might do. So it's just a real good exercise. But so is chopping wood when there's wood to chop, and so is working in a garden when there's a garden to work in, and so is that type of labor when it's available. But when it's not available, then you still have to get some exercise, and so we need to sometimes go to these different things like walking to get it, because it's not like the old days, you see. The old days, just getting out of bed was exercise, because in order to keep warm you had to chop wood, and just building the fire to cook a meal was work. If you wanted to go any place, you either walked or you had to hitch up a horse or a buggy, or there was work involved in everything. But nowadays, there's not a lot of work involved in things, and so therefore we tend not to get a lot of exercise unless we plan for it. And I think that's the key to exercise. We need to plan for it at least 3 to 5 times a week. We need to get some good physical exercise. And then we have, of course, water. Water on the inside, water on the outside. They say 6 to 8 glasses a day. That's kind of a ballpark figure. You don't find anywhere in the Spirit of Prophecy where Ellen White says 6 to 8 glasses a day. She just says we ought to have plenty of it on the inside and out. And we have sort of, by measuring the output, through our urine and through our feces and through our respirations and through perspiration and these type of things, we pretty much know how much we lose. And therefore, we've sort of gauged then how much we have to replace. And it's about, 6 to 8 glasses a day on the average. Sunshine, we know about sunshine. You need to get out in it every day. You only need to expose your hands and face, though. That's about all that needs to be exposed to get enough sunshine for the body to manufacture vitamin D and the different things that you need that for. Temperance. Definition for temperance is the total abstinence from all things what? Harmful, and the judicial use of all those things that are healthful. And I like that word judicial. Can't pronounce it real well, but I like the word because you can even get too much of a good thing, right? You can overdo in about any area if you try hard enough. Fresh air. We have pretty good air here in the Northwest. Sometimes if the wind's blowing from Tacoma way, it might get a little smoggy, but for the most part, it's pretty good air. However, not many people know how they need to take it in. They tend to not know how to breathe properly. Now, I always thought that I knew how to breathe properly, since how I was alive. I felt I must be breathing right to be alive. But I found out one day that I wasn't breathing properly. And when I found out how you were supposed to breathe, I practiced for 3 solid weeks before I was able to do it. It was that difficult for me to breathe properly. You see, it has to do with the mechanism working just about the opposite of what we're normally used to doing it. When you take in an inspiration of air, for example, rather than your abdomen going in and your chest coming up and you kind of sucking it in like that, it's just the opposite of that. The abdominal muscles are to go out, which pulls the diaphragm down and out, which creates a negative pressure within the chest, which helps fill the lungs with air. And then when you breathe out, the abdominal muscles should come in and up, and the intercostal spaces between the ribs even contract, and it helps to force the air out. The reason we need to breathe properly is simply because the very tips of our lungs, it's called the apex of the lungs, do not get well aired if we're not taking in good inspirations of air. And it's up here in the apex is where many of your lung diseases take place. So we need to breathe properly. We need to get plenty of rest, and that in this day and age is rather hard to do too, isn't it? Because we tend to be very busy people. But I was just reading today, as I was looking at some statements, that one of the simple remedies that Ellen White stressed was the fact that we tend to be too busy and too much in a hurry and have too many goals set for us, that just that whole thing in itself is real harmful to our health. And so we need to make sure that we don't put too many things into a day. And we need to get plenty of rest. About 7 to 8 hours of sleep at night. But we also need time for devotion and time for contemplation and that kind of rest. And a little recreation now and then is also good for us. And trust in God is on the very bottom of the list, but actually that's where it should be, you see. Because what is it that holds up the building? It's the foundation. And so trusting God is of course, the foundation of the whole thing that holds everything up. So it needs to be there on the bottom. It's really not last, it's actually first. Now over here in the middle column, you see this column right here is God's disease prevention program. If we stay on that program, we're usually pretty much disease-free. But every now and then, you know, like you might be on an airplane and you might have a little jet lag and you might be a little more tired than normal. And there might be somebody sitting next to you that has a cold or the flu. And we'll say that he sort of leans over and, shoo, you know. And, you know, several thousand viruses become airborne. And they sort of parachute right down on you, and you inhale them, and they go into your nasal pharynx and down your throat and into your respiratory tract and you know, set up housekeeping. And if your resistance happens to be a little bit down, you see, that just might be enough for them to get entrenched and for you to come down with a cold or the flu or whatever it might be. Also, even though we're careful, sometimes injuries, you know, take place. You know, we could break an arm or a leg or sprain an ankle or something to that nature. And when that happens, the body's homeostasis is actually disrupted. Now, homeostasis looks like one of those big terms that's really hard to understand what it might be. But actually, you know, most medical terms actually are very simple when you understand what they really stand for. They usually stand for very simple things. And this homeostasis stands for homeo, meaning the same, and stasis meaning standing. It simply means the same standing. Or we could say normal. The body has what it calls normal, a pulse rate of about 72 beats per minute. That's normal. The body doesn't like it too high, doesn't like it too low, likes it, you know, normal. Temperature, 98.6. We consider that normal. The body doesn't like it up at 103 or doesn't like it down, you know, at 97 or 96. You know, that's too cold. Likes it at 98.6. That's normal. Blood pressure, they say 120/80. That's kind of a real average figure. With exercise, you can certainly get it lower than that. And a lot of people have lower blood pressures than that, but that's kind of a ballpark figure. So the body says, you know, there's a pressure in the cardiovascular system that I consider normal, and it works to keep it that way. Now, as I said before, I believe that God is working through all this, you know, but he has set things under laws, and he has what he considers normal things. And anytime sickness or injury takes the body out of normal, there's an upset in this homeostatic balance, and that's what we actually call disease, is an upset or an imbalance in homeostasis. When that happens, mechanisms go right to work to try to correct this. An example of it might be, let's say that you were sitting here and your heart started racing for some unknown reason, and it's racing away. Well, there's nerves in the blood vessels that are pressure-sensing nerves, and they know how much pressure should be in that blood vessel. And when there's more pressure in that blood vessel than ought to be there, messages are sent to the brain to tell the brain that that's what's going on. The brain, in turn, sets up mechanisms to slow that heart down, one of which is to dilate blood vessels. It's just sort of picture the cardiovascular system is like a container for blood. And so what it's going to do now, it's going to expand the diameter of those blood vessels, which is going to make the container a little bigger. And when the container gets a little bigger, what happens to the pressure? It goes down, right? It goes down. And so that's one of the things that the brain does, tells the blood vessels to dilate, takes off some of that pressure. And as long as that message comes to the brain that there's too much pressure, mechanisms will continue to go to work to try to take that pressure off. They call that a negative feedback system. It's sort of like the thermostat over on the wall. You set it to 70 degrees, and when the information from the environment comes back that it is indeed 70 degrees now, it shuts off. It does the opposite of the information it gets. And when the information comes to it that it's below 70 degrees, it's now cold in the room, it clicks back on. So it sends out the opposite response that it gets. Cold, it sends out heat. Too hot, it shuts off. And that's how the body mechanisms work. How are we doing up for time, Glenn?
15 minutes.
Okay, good. So now once we fall into this second category, even though we are good health performers and even though we're doing our best to stay on top of things, we fall into that category, then we have a decision to make. How is it that we are going to cooperate with God in our getting better? Well, we're going to start at the bottom there. That bottom remedy is the remedy called nothing. Okay? Do you think that's a good remedy, by the way? You do. Nothing. Okay, well, it may be, the best of two evils, I don't know, but we should do something. When we get sick or we get injured, we should do something. Now, if we had a cold, for example, and we decided, okay, I'm just not going to do anything about it at all. Well, probably over a given period of time, we will eventually get over that cold. The body is going to set things in motion and it's going to work very hard to try to thwart off that cold. However, had we taken a hot foot bath at the very beginning, when we first felt the first inklings of getting that cold, had we jumped into a hot foot bath, we could have possibly avoided the cold altogether. Not even come down with it. I don't know if you've ever been, we'll just say, sitting in a church, and a lot of churches nowadays have those concrete floors with just a little sliver of a piece of rug on top, and you're sitting there, and it may be warm up top here, but for some reason it's not too warm down there on the floor. And you're sitting there and your feet kind of get cold, and then that cold sort of works its way up, and by the time church is out, it's above your knees. You ever had that? And you just kind of feel like, oh man, I feel like I may be coming down with a cold. Just those first little inklings of it. Well, if you'd have went home at that time and stuck your feet in hot water, probably you'd have never come down with a cold if you did it right away. And also, had you taken a simple remedy, you might have not have come down with pneumonia, a secondary condition of your cold. You came down with pneumonia. You could have avoided that by doing something rather than doing nothing. So that's a bad remedy. The next remedy is faith alone. Faith alone. Now you think that's a good remedy. Faith alone. I'm just going to pray this thing away. Well, actually, it's kind of like doing nothing, isn't it? Because we're told that faith without works is what? That's what James tells us. Actually, people think there's this thing called faith and there's this thing called works, but actually it's faith plus works actually equals faith. Do you ever think of it that way? Every time you hear the servant of the Lord talk about it, it's always faith that works by love and purifies the soul. So it's faith plus works really equals true faith, and not by itself. So we need to put our faith into action, and we need to do the things that we know how to do. The problem is a lot of time is that we really haven't worked at knowing what to do. I have an interesting statement here on that line. This is from Medical Ministry, page 321. It says, as religious aggression subverts the liberties of our nation, those who would stand for freedom of conscience will be placed in unfavorable positions. you believe that day's coming? I believe that day's coming. I mean, as I hear the news and as I hear some of the things that are going on, just more and more conviction is growing in my heart that that day is just upon us, and that Protestant America is soon to have her day, and is going to become, that lamb-like voice is going to become very much like a dragon in suppressing our freedoms. So we're going to be placed in very unfavorable positions. Now it goes on to say, for their own sake they should, while they have opportunity, become intelligent in regard to disease, its causes, prevention, and cure. Now, this is in the context of what? This is in the context of a national Sunday law. This is in a context of the making up of the image to the beast. I mean, that's the context of this here. When our religious liberties are threatened and we who stand for freedom are put in unfavorable conditions. And she says at this time, she says, or actually before this time, she says we need to become intelligent in regard to disease, its causes, prevention, and cure. Now why is that? It goes on to say that, and those who do this will find a field of labor anywhere. Anywhere. In other words, you're never going to be out of work. I mean, did you ever wonder how we were going to eat when we couldn't buy or sell? Did you ever think about that? Well, I think this is how we're going to eat. I think, we're told that the very last work that's going to be done in this earth is what kind of work? Medical missionary work. I think it's going to be, that's how we're going to eat, is through our medical missionary work, because it says that we're going to find a field of labor anywhere. It says there will be suffering ones, plenty of them, who will need help, not only among those of our own faith, but largely among those who know not the truth. The shortness of time demands an energy that has not been aroused among those who claim to believe the present truth. So she's saying, while we have opportunity, we need to become intelligent in regard to disease, how to prevent disease, how disease is caused, and what we can do in the area of curing it with methods that God can add His virtue to and cause to work. Interesting statement. That's Medical Ministry 321. Oh, I was hoping we'd run out of time before I got to this one. This is the one I don't like talking about, this particular aspect of the treatment of disease, because, especially among Adventists, we all have different thoughts on what is mystic and what is not mystic. And I'm always afraid I'm going to step on some toes, and most of the time do, because what I consider mystic, someone else may think, well, that's good medicine. That's the real McCoy. But we will cover a few things that I would consider fall in the category of mysticism, and we may kind of get in the middle of this tonight because we got 5 minutes. Okay, so this will be my last comment. We'll take it up right there at Mystic Medicine tomorrow night, so you won't be able to throw anything at me tonight. I'd like to just speak about homeopathy just for a moment. A lot of our people get into homeopathy because it seems a lot more harmless than using real drugs, because they are so diluted. But when you look into homeopathy, you go back to its origin and you actually understand what they're really saying, let me tell you, it is mystical stuff. Let me just read you a little bit here. Let's say that the homeopath decided that he would use belladonna in very, very small amounts. He's going to use this for bronchitis, and he's going to use what's called a 30C solution. Let's see what that would mean. Well, scientifically, a 30C solution would be expressed as 10 to the 60th power. That's the concentration, 10 to the 60th power. That number, a 1 followed by 60 zeros, is virtually beyond imagining. A 30C belladonna solution is about a million billion times more dilute, a million billion times more dilute than a solution made from dissolving one molecule of salt in a body of water as large as all the Earth's oceans combined. Okay? That's a whopping dose, huh? That is so dilute it's beyond imagination. At such astronomically high dilutions, of course, the amount of belladonna extract in a homeopathic portion given to a patient with bronchitis would be nil. According to the laws of chemistry and probability, a remedy that has been prepared at 10 to the 24th power dilution, that is a homeopathic dosage of 12C, would be theoretically be dilute just past the point where a dose contains a single molecule of the original substance. At that particular concentration, there couldn't be even a single molecule of that substance in it. Well, that really doesn't pose any problem to the homeopaths, because what they're looking at is not the substance, but the shadow of the substance which once was. Now, if that's not spiritualistic, I don't know what what you could possibly call it. Tomorrow night, then, we will take up again right about that point, and I'll share just a few more things with you on that subject, and then we'll move on from there.